It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum. And I'm all out of gum.
You know, Gran Turismo 2 is easily one of the best PS1 games out there, and it's pretty easy to see why. Its gameplay is amazing, graphics-wise looks pretty damn outstanding, and the music is pleasing to my ears. With that said, the game has a little tiny problem. It's the frame rate. Gran Turismo 2 runs at 30 frames per second, which while it's not bad by any means, it's pretty jarring, especially for a racing game. Now, you might be wondering, well that sucks, is the game doomed forever? Well, not really. What if I told you that there is a way to play Gran Turismo 2 at 60 frames per second?
You what?
Yep, you heard that right. There's actually a way to play Gran Turismo at 60 frames per second, and it's all thanks to this little cookie monster himself, Cookie PL Monster, aka Silent. This guy has made a lot of game patches on a lot of games other than Gran Turismo 2, such as Colin McRae Rally 2, Toka 2, and the PC version of Crazy Taxi. However, of all the patches that he made for other games that I mentioned, I feel his GT2's codes are one of the best that he made, especially the 60 frames per second code, which makes the game so much better, among other codes which I'll talk about later. So to use his codes, we need an emulator, and for the sake of this video, we'll be using the new PS1 emulator named Duckstation, which honestly is easily the best PS1 emulator to use, since it has a lot of excellent features such as overclocking the CPU, PGXP support, which stops the polygons wobbling, and other things such as per game config. Before we start using the codes, we need to mention that GT2 had a lot of versions, depending on what region the game was released. For instance, in Japan, GT2 had two versions, the version 1.0, which was the initial release of the game, whereas the 1.1 was the PS1 Books release, which is similar to the PS1 Platinum releases, where they sell the game at a lower price. In the US, it had three versions, 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2, which was the greatest hits release. However, the 1.2 only applies to the simulation discs and not to the arcade disc. Then we have the European releases, where they are pretty identical. So there's no version differences in the PAL version, even the Platinum releases are the same, so you shouldn't be worried about the PAL releases. Now, you might be asking, MrJohn, why are you mentioning the version releases of the game? This is because you have to use different codes for those versions, as you can't just use a single cheat code on all the versions of the game. To put it bluntly, each version requires its own cheat codes. So if you want to use these cheat codes, you need to make sure that you have the right codes for the right version. For instance, if you're using the 1.2 version of the game, you should absolutely use the codes for the 1.2 version. In this video, we're gonna use the 1.2 version of the game, the simulation disc to be more precise, since the greatest hits arcade disc is the version 1.1. So if you want to use the codes that I'm gonna mention in this video for the arcade disc, use the 1.1 version codes for the game. Anyways, before we start, make sure you have a BIOS file for the emulator, otherwise it will not work. Also, we need to download the cheat codes for the game, and we go to Silent GitHub and go into this repository where we can download the cheat codes that we need for this game. Then after that, extract the cheat files to the Duckstation directory for better results. Once you've done that, boot up Duckstation and we have to do some configurations for the game. First off, click the right button of the mouse to access the properties of the game you want to configure. Then go to the user configuration section to overclock the CPU of the PlayStation. Set up about like 350 or 400%. Then boot up the game, go to Cheats Manager and click Import, and for the version 1.2, the simulation disk that is, go to 60 frames per second folder and select NTSC 1.2. then the cheat will appear on the list, then select the cheat and enable it, then restart the game, then go to the replay section, and if it runs at true 60 frames per second, then congratulations, you're now playing GT2 at 60 frames per second. This method of setting up cheats such as the 60 frames per second code for the game applies all the other cheats codes of the game that I'm gonna mention later. If you're using the arcade mode disc and you want to use the 60 frames per second code, do the same procedure, but this time select NTSC 1.1 since the arcade disc doesn't have a version 1.2 and it's the version 1.1. Then go to the replay section, and if it works, then you're good to go. Now, as you can see, the difference is really big. Playing at true 60 frames per second feels like I'm playing a remastered version of this game.
But wait! There's more!
Did you know that there's also a code that lets you play the game at a widescreen resolution? But wait, you say, Mr. John, Duckstation does have an option called widescreen hack. Why would I use a cheat code if I can enable this hack? And my answer to that question is, while Duckstation does have that feature and the majority of the games does work well with that hack, unfortunately GT2 is not one of those games, as using this hack can cause some graphical glitches such as objects getting cut off on the edges of the screen. Luckily with this cheat, these glitches don't happen anymore. Now there's no more thick yellow EVO V cars, now we have wide yellow EVO V cars to cruise around, which is pretty cool, and you can use this cheat in conjunction with the 60 frames per second code. Similar to the 60 frames per second code, make sure you use the right codes for the right version of the game. For instance, if you have the 1.2 version of the game, use the code that supports the 1.2 version of the game. Same thing for the 1.1 version of the arcade disc, use the code that supports the 1.1 version of the arcade disc. As you can see, with this code you have more vision during the races, which is always pretty cool. The metric unit code is an interesting one, as it changes the measurement units from imperial, which is miles per hour, to metric, which is kilometers per hour. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because the US version of GT2 has the measurement units set to imperial, whereas the PAL and Japanese versions of GT2 have the units set to metric. Sadly, you can't change these things in game, which kinda bugged me since other racing games like Test Drive 6, Colin McRae Rally 2, and Need for Speed High Stakes had an option to change these units. Luckily, thanks to this cheat, we can change the measurements whichever we like. Me personally, since I prefer the NTSC version, I always use the cheat to change the units to metric because I like big numbers when I go very fast, but that's just me. If you have played GT2 before, you probably know that during the races, if you're very far from the opponents, their level of detail gets lower. Now this isn't very noticeable when playing the game on the native resolution, but with upscaling, this flaw becomes much more noticeable. However, thanks to Silent's recent work, he made a code that forces all the AI cars to use their highest level of detail models during the race. However, there's a catch. In order to make this code to work, you have to enable a certain feature on Duckstation, and that is enabling 8MB of RAM. What this does is it utilizes the extra RAM that the PS1 devs kits had, making it possible to use the cheat code to enable full detail AI cars. Not only that, but this cheat also requires another cheat code in order to work, and it's this one. This thing makes the game display everything with the full detail AI cars code combined, and it doubles the size of the game's polygon buffers. Not using this code will cause the game to glitch since the game runs out of space in its polygon buffers and starts skipping geometry. So it's pretty important for not only enable the 8MB of RAM feature, but also using the code for doubling the size of the game's polygon buffers for the better results. While this cheat code isn't as impactful as the other cheat codes that I mentioned, it's still an interesting one to talk about it. Did you know that during the replays, the game tends to have a higher draw distance, whereas during the races, the draw distance is much lower? No worries though, because this cheat code makes the game having more draw distance than ever before. This is pretty noticeable in some circuits like Midfield Raceway. You can see with the code, it actually fixes the infamous hole in the ground at the beginning of the track, so that's pretty cool. Just like with other emulators that supports internal resolution upscaling, Duckstation has that feature as well, and upscaling the resolution of any game can make it more crispier and sharper than ever before. With that said, the only disadvantage that the upscaling offers is that when the game is played at higher resolutions, you can clearly see that the polygons jitter and pop over other polygons a lot. This is because the PS1 rendered the graphics in a unique way, to say the least. However, a new feature that was present in PCXR, named Precision Geometry Transform Pipeline, or PGXP for short, is not only available on Beetle PSX, but also on Duckstation. And oh boy, let me tell you, it makes the game's graphics wise alongside the upscaling so much better. It is as if Polyphony Digital made a PC version of the game instead of the PS1 version, and it clearly shows. You see why emulation is the way of the future, kids? Here's some comparisons when using PGXP on and off. And last but not least, we have this wonderful mod made by PES2K named GT2+. This mod adds a lot of bug fixes and adds a lot of content that was cut off from the final game, like the Mercedes CLK race car, Volkswagen Polo, new color schemes for some cars, and many more like new menus, you name it. Not to mention, it also makes the game more accessible and balanced with more priced cars to obtain and so on. Now, does the cheat codes work if I played this mod? Yes, it does work. However, if you already have a save file from the vanilla version of the game, and if you patch the game, then you can't use it since it's not compatible with the mod. Your only choice is to start the game all over again, which kinda sucks, but it is what it is. Now, this mod, in conjunction with the cheat codes combined like 60 frames per second, widescreen, and many others, turns GT2 from an already outstanding experience to an absolute excellent experience and then some. You can find this mod by searching on Google and then go to this link and you'll find the mod. Then all you have to do is download the patch. Then you need to have a program that can patch the original game, and we'll be using X-Delta Patcher. Now make sure you have the right patch for the right version, otherwise it will not work. For example, if I have the PAL version of GT2, then I'll be using the PAL patch, or if I have the US 1.2 version of the game, then I'll be using the 1.2 version patch. If it works, congratulations, you'll be able to play GT2 with all the content restored. Have fun! And that's it for the video, guys. I hope that this helped you find the best way to play Gran Turismo 2, and a huge thanks to Silent and Paz2K for the content that they have created. And also make sure you visit Silent's Twitter and his website, since he posts really good stuff when it comes to game modding. You won't be disappointed. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content, and I'll see your gorgeous faces next time.